All right, everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. So today we're going to be talking about crankbait fishing during the winter. So with that being said, I get questions from you guys about, why would you choose a flat-sided crankbait over a round-bodied crankbait? Why wouldn't you choose, the square lip over the round lip, or so on and so forth? Just multitude of questions on crankbaits and why I choose particular crankbaits for this particular time of year. And we're going to cover all that. And as we do, I want you to understand all these have a specific reason, okay? I'm not saying if you pick up one on a day that the fish are just biting good, they're gonna bite one better than the other. It's just sometimes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes you go to the lake, you're throwing one thing, your partner's throwing another thing, you're not getting bit, he's getting bit, or vice versa, and it's just simple little bait modifications or simple bait changes that can kind of look similar at times, but either way, we're going to cover it, so stay tuned. This is something you don't want to miss. All right, so talking about crankbait fishing, and one thing I do want to bring up real quick, make sure if you're watching the video and it helps you at all, make sure to like the video. It helps me out a lot. And number two, subscribe. I'm always putting out content on bass fishing. It helps me out a whole lot. But either way, talking about crankbait fishing, one of the biggest things I need you to understand in the winter time is not everything's running around wild, just wide open. When you see a minnow or a shad or a bass, any type of fish swim around during the winter, they're cold. They're moving slow, they're easing around. They may even get to a spot and just hang out there for Lord knows how long. Their metabolism slow down, the water temperature goes down, metabolism slow down, they don't need to eat as much. They're not running around like crazy burning those calories that they took in. That being said, it's kind of like if you have, a fish bowl and you take one of those like little betta fishes or something and throw it in there, and it's room temp, and you tap on the glass, or swirl your finger around in the water or something, that fish is going to go all over the bowl. Now that being said, if you fill that bowl up with cold water and you drop that betta fish in there, well, number one, it can shock you, but either way, you go to touch the bowl or mess with the fish, and the fish just it'll barely just move away. It's not going crazy. It's not going all over the place. It's cold. It's cold, it's cold, it's cold. Everything needs to slow down. Now, with that being said, the most important thing I want you to understand when you're fishing those crankbaits and stuff this time of year, and you're getting what we call short strikes, which is, the fish is bumping it, they're not necessarily getting it, or those fish are kind of swiping at it, and every fish that you catch, they just barely got one hook in their lip, or they're throwing it about every time, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of reason to that. These fish are swimming up and they're hitting that bait, but a lot of times I've noticed this with swim bait fishing. I do a lot of swim bait fishing this time of year, and I notice when I run fluorocarbon line, there's kind of a technique that I do, because there's one or two ways. I can run monofilament where I have that extra stretch and that less sensitivity. I can throw that swim bait, and as I'm reeling it, I'm not initially going to feel that bite, but as soon as they get it, I can set the hook and I know I got that fish. Now, the other thing I can say, if I'm running fluorocarbon, which I do during the winter, if I'm running fluorocarbon, it is a little bit more difficult to cast on those extremely cold days. It sticks a lot. You can take something like Real Magic is what I do, spray on my line, and that'll help keep it from freezing and stuff like that. But with that being said, throwing those swim baits or those crankbaits this time of year, I'm really going to pay attention to my bites, and jumping the gun can be a huge downfall for your day. A lot of that happens to me a lot of times, because I'll be reeling that bait and I get excited because I hadn't got bit in a little while, and I go to jerking that rod, and when I go to jerking that rod, I'm jerking the bait out of the fish's mouth, or I just didn't have a good hook set on that fish, so it comes up, spits it, or it turns loose of it, whatever the case may be. So what I typically like to do, I like throwing these baits on a slow roll. When I'm rolling those baits real slow, when I feel that initial bite, I don't stop reeling. Okay, I'm not just stopping, I'm not just trying to set the hook on. I'm focused and I'm paying close attention to what's going on. And as I reel that bait, I'm just going to keep reeling it real slow when that initial bite happens. Now, when I feel that resistance, I'm going to keep reeling, and I'm just going to pull into that fish, whether I'm using the swim bait or whether I'm using the crankbait. I'm just using the swim bait as an example because it happens a lot more on the swim bait than it does the crankbait. But either way, your most important thing is going to be your setup, okay? This is the Thunderhawk Tyco series. Use whatever rod and stuff you prefer to like. The main thing is the action, okay? This is a 7-foot moderate fast action. Okay, so you know, I typically like those glass rods. That's a carbon rod. I've gotten used to it. I really enjoy it. It is a stiffer rod, but I'm going to suggest if you could buy, if you're looking for a cheap alternative, definitely go with a glass rod. You're going to notice a huge difference in your hang-up ratios. You're going to catch a lot more fish, especially this time of year when they're barely just nipping at that bait. It gives them time, that rod, to load up as you're reeling. That fish is going to turn and set the hook on itself. When it does and you're reeling that bait, that rod's going to load up. And if it jumps or is, you know, swinging its head or something like that, it's typically 99% of the time not going to be able to throw that bait. Now, if you're setting a hook like you're flipping, you're going to typically jerk that bait out of that fish's mouth this time of year. So, you know, I suggest, you know, just keep reeling into those fish. Pay really, really close attention to what's going on. Don't get caught up on setting the hook. But some type of moderate, fast action rod is going to be a game changer, I promise you, this time of year. Now, if you're still struggling and you're running fluorocarbon, swap to monofilament. Monofilament has stretch, okay? So with that stretch, it's a little bit easier to cast. With that stretch, while you're reeling that bait, they're going to have all the give in the world. They're going to have all the give in the world. Now, they're not going to be able to necessarily just, you know, do whatever they want to, but you know, you can still control that to an extent. And they're not going to be wild. Like I said, they're not going to be wild as bucks, you know, just jumping out of the water like crazy every 2 seconds and stuff like that. They're cold. They're cold. They're going to put up a good fight for a few minutes and then they're going to slow down, okay? It's pretty easy during the winter to get the fish in the boat, unless, you know, they're just an anomaly and they're just wild, which typically they're not. So, you know, swapping a monofilament, you're going to have better castability than fluorocarbon. You're also going to have more stretch. That fish is going to have a lot more give. I typically still run fluorocarbon on my crankbaits, but now if I get under 50-degree water temps, well, I say 50, if I get under that 49-degree water temps, I'm definitely going to go with monofilament just because it's easier to cast. Now, let's talk about the baits. All right, so the first bait that I want to talk about, this is a well-known bait, I guess you could say, during the winter. This is going to be your round lip, kind of that round body style, but that's a Rapala DT style crankbait. Why do I prefer the Rapala DT crankbaits this time of year? Number one, it's balsa wood, okay? With that balsa wood, it's a completely different sound when this bait is hitting rocks and stuff like that. It's got a completely different action. It's not as aggressive, it's more subtle, and that's typically what you want this time of year, typically, okay? And we're going to get into that later on. But you know, the Rapala DT series, I love running these, whether it's rip wrap, steep bluff rocks, you know, they got multiple ones to dive to different depth ranges. I typically use my Rapala DT series when it comes to, you know, that 10+ range this time of year, simply because the bait gets down there super easy. I can make a super long cast, get down there quickly, and I'll just stay in the strike zone a lot longer. So but the Rapala DT series, you're gonna have good castability, you know, this time of year, especially when your line's cold and stuff like that. But you know, you may want to just play around and do like with the Real Magic or something like that. But either way, don't put down power fishing baits this time of year. I promise you're gonna load up on fish this time of year. Those big girls sitting in that 10 to 12 foot range, the Rapala DT series is gonna be a big help, all different kinds of colors. I'm typically gonna slow roll this. I'm gonna throw that bait out there way past where I'm trying to target. I'm gonna burn that bait down. As it gets down, I'm gonna slow down as soon as I start hitting bottom, whatever type of cover or structure I'm targeting. Now the next one, this one's about kind of like trying to throw a potato chip, but you can do it on spinning setup. I do it on my medium moderate spinning rod that I use for underspins, but that's the Rapala Shad Wrap. Now the Rapala Shad Wrap, it's just a super good cold weather bait. If I get under 50-degree water temps, I'm probably going to throw this all day. Multiple different sizes. I like the size 5, I like the size 6 and the size 7. Buy whatever you want. People have different opinions on them. Size 5 is what I like in particular, but multiple different, you know, colors and stuff like that. And even with my spinning setup, as I'm throwing this bait right here, if I've got, you know, the 10-pound braided line to 8-pound fluorocarbon, I'm going to swap that up, okay? Especially when it gets in that colder water temps. I'm going to run the 10-pound braided line, but I'm going to put on 6-pound monofilament, okay, and run that on that spinning reel. You'll be able to catch fish a lot easier. You're going to have a lot more give. But the main thing with this bait is you can't cast it super far, but you have to slow down with this bait. That's the main thing. You have to slow down with this bait. You're going to catch a lot of fish on it. You're going to have to slow down with this bait, because if you don't, the bait will burn out. every time. So as it burns out, what I mean by that is it's going to roll over on its side, its back, and stuff like that. It's not going to be acting correctly. But that's a great bait for those water temps that's under 50 degrees. You can pretty much run that bait all winter long, basically. Now the next one I want to talk about is Berkeley's version. This right here is the Money Badger. Y'all have heard me talk about the Money Badger before. The Money Badger, it's got a very, very similar style to those Spro rock crawlers and things like that. It's just a well-renowned bait when it comes to, you know, being around rocks or you're fishing clay points. I've had a lot of good luck off the Money Badger on clay points and areas like that. Those cheap or deep channel bluff swing, stuff like that, big old chunk rocks, bouncing this bait off of that stuff, throwing it on that regular setup. But you know, either way, this is a great option, you know, to target that 4 to, you know, really 7 foot range. You can really slow this bait down, target those areas, stay in the strike zone for a long time. It's a super easy bait to use. I use it just like I do 99% of my crankbaits. I'm slow rolling that bait as it bumps up against stuff. I may pause it for a minute. It just kind of depends on what the fish are wanting, how, you know, how the fish are telling me they're reacting to stuff that day. Now the next one's going to go right in line with that Berkeley Money Badger, and that's going to be the Spro rock crawler. Now, y'all have heard me talk about this bait for years. It's still a great bait. I mean, it's just, I think it's just one of those baits where it's always just going to be a good bait. It's good to throw it during the winter. It's good to throw it during the spring, summer, fall. It doesn't really matter. This bait just catches fish. I've got tons of them look like they've been drugged behind a truck. They're just good baits, period. But with this bait, I'm doing that same thing. I'm slow rolling this bait. This is going to be that bait where I'm targeting that 8-9 foot range, max 9. But when they want kind of a little bit more of a wider wobble and a little bit of a hunting action, then that's typically when I go with that rock crawler, okay? This is not gonna be one of those wild where it's just kind of, you know, just flying all over the place, but it is gonna hunt. It is gonna hunt as it's bouncing off of stuff and things like that. So it kind of goes in time with that wiggle wart. Now, here's the thing. Some of you may be asking, why do you not have the wiggle wart in this video? Because I don't. And the main reason is there is a big difference between the new wiggle warts and the old style wiggle warts. 2 different kinds of plastic made by 2 different, I don't know if it's 2 different manufacturers or what, but either way, they were made differently back in the day than they are now. And if you take one and put it in one boat, same lake, and you know, with the opposite boat, put the new one in their boat, you let them both go out and fish, the old one's going to catch a lot more fish. It's just the way it is. They're just built different. And if you can get your hands on one of the old wiggle warts, I highly suggest going with one of the old wiggle warts. The new ones, I haven't had a whole lot of luck off of them personally. If you have, drop a comment down below, let me know. But either way, let's talk about a flat-sided crankbait. Now this is a crankbait that I'm typically going to be running all year long. This is the KVD 1.5, and this is the flat-sided crankbait. Kevin designed this bait to run in cold water, and that's exactly what this bait does. It does a little bit of everything. It's good in brush, it's good in rocks. It can go through just about anything. 99% of the time, I'm gonna have that bait tied on with the flat-sided KVD crankbait. Now, not knocking any other brand or anything like that. Like I always say, use whatever you feel comfortable with. The main thing is that flat side. Okay, with the flat side, what this allows me to do, or what the bait does, is it's got a little bit tighter wobble, okay? So it's not swaying all over the place. It's got that kind of rattle trap option where it's just kind of, you know, wiggling real tight. And it mimics, you know, a shad that's really cold. You know, they're not going to be, they're not just going to be going all over the place and stuff like that. They're going to be cruising through there. That's what this bait mimics. Now, one thing that I do like to do, and I'm fixing to have to do it with this one because I'm out of some of my older ones. They just got old because I only use these during the winter. But either way, one thing that I really like to do with these baits, that glossy color on it, I really don't want that glossy color on most of my clear water baits. This one is kind of beat up, but I'm still going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm going to go over this where this bait's almost kind of white everywhere. And it's going to take that gloss off of it. It just makes stuff look a little bit more natural. But you know, take a little piece of sandpaper or something like that. What I advise do what I do. Buy one, leave it like it is. Buy another one, sand it down a little bit and make it look real dull. I'm sure most of y'all have baits in your tackle box that look like they've been drugged behind the truck, and you still catch a lot of fish off of them. I think sometimes those dull colors really trigger the fish to bite a lot more. Now the next one I want to talk about is a rattle trap, okay? Now there's two different rattle traps that I go with this time of year. Now both of them are made by Thunderhawk. Both of these are the Sergeant Lipless Crankbaits. And you know, if you go to order some, go down in the description, go to the Thunderhawk website, put in my code, you'll save 20% and it helps me out a whole lot. But either way, there's two versions that I throw. I've got this one right here, which is actually a silent lipless crankbait. Now, if I'm fishing one of those clear highland reservoirs like Lewis Smith Lake or something like that, I'm typically gonna be throwing one that does not have rattles in it. I want everything as silent as possible. The main thing is the action of this bait. It's gonna be a tight wiggle. This bait's gonna sit nose down. So if you're fishing over brush tops that are deep, maybe yo-yoing, you know, that lipless crankbait, as you're pulling that bait up and down, yo-yoing that bait, it comes through cover a lot better. Now I'm not saying if you drop this bait directly into the brush pile and let it go down about 4 or 5 limbs and pull up on it, it's going to come through it. It may, I don't know, I have never done that with it. But if you're looking for those areas where those fish are, you know, kind of positioned up in brush or around brush, top of brush, something like that, and you're yo-yoing that bait, the lipless is going to be one of your best bets. Also, just, you know, targeting suspended fish this time of year, the lipless is going to be a great option. You can really slow roll that bait. You can do little finite rod movements to, you know, make that bait stand out a little different. Yo-yoing once again. But now the rattle version, I'm typically going to be going with that rattle version when we have stain to the water. Okay, and when I say stain, I don't mean like, hey, I can see 2 or 3 foot down. I'm talking, you know, the most like 6 to 8 inches. Okay, it's very stained. Okay, and when I say 6 to 8 inches, I'm talking about dropping a white bait, you know, 6 to 8 inches in the water column and still being able to see some type of color. I'm talking muddy to stained. Okay, pretty aggressive stained water, and that's typically what I'm gonna look for too, because if I can get in those areas where that water's stained, I can typically catch a lot more fish. If they can't see me and I can't necessarily see them, they're typically going to react more because they're not feeling any type of pressure. The only downside to that is sometimes, like what happened recently, I go back up in a creek, it's muddy, it looks, I mean, it looks like, you know, just bass heaven, and all I see on my graph's just shad from front to back, just tons of shad. And there wasn't a whole lot of bass. So there was no reason for them to compete. It was really hard to get those fish to target any kind of bait that we were throwing. So then we have to move back out to the main lake and so on and so forth. You can watch that in the weekly fishing report last week. But either way, guys, that is the crankbaits that I typically like to throw this time of year. That's my setups that I like to throw my crankbaits on. I hope the video helped you. If it did, make sure to like, subscribe for more content. It helps me out a whole lot. Also, comment if you have any questions or you just want to talk bass fishing. I love hearing from you guys. You know, we got merchandise in the store now, hats, shirts, all that good stuff. Make sure to check all that out if you're interested. You know, you can purchase through there. My sponsors links down in the description. All these baits are in the shop, so you can click on the shop. It'll carry you straight to that. You can order any of the baits that you may need or may want. But like I say, before you go to ordering anything, make sure you understand that I'm talking about actions. This is the reason that I'm running or choosing one crankbait over another. Okay, tight actions versus wide wobble actions. It just depends on what the fish are wanting, and I highly suggest, you know, get multiples, and that way you can play around with it that day, because you never know, just that little subtle bait change, that little subtle action, something small can typically trigger those fish to start biting a lot more. But either way, guys, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.